In episode 84, titled Automation and BAS Concepts, the core idea is that automation gives you repeatability, and repeatability is what turns security work from one-off effort into something you can measure and improve.
When a task can be executed the same way each time, you reduce the hidden variability that comes from fatigue, differing skill levels, and inconsistent assumptions. That consistency matters because modern security programs are judged not only by what they can do once, but by what they can do reliably over time. Automation also changes the conversation with stakeholders because you can discuss trends, baselines, and confidence rather than anecdotes. In this episode, we treat automation as a disciplined way to produce predictable outcomes that support both testing and operational readiness.
One useful way to frame automation is as a system for reducing manual effort while improving the predictability of results. Manual work is not inherently bad, but it has limits, especially when you need to execute the same checks across many assets, environments, or time periods. When tasks are repeated by hand, steps get skipped, thresholds drift, and documentation becomes uneven, which makes it difficult to compare results fairly. Automation helps by encoding the procedure so it runs the same way each time, with the same inputs, the same rules, and the same output structure. That, in turn, makes findings easier to validate, because the procedure can be rerun to confirm whether a change fixed the issue. In a pen test plus mindset, this is about demonstrating control and repeatable methodology, not about flashy tooling. The goals of automation tend to be practical and grounded: reduce manual effort, minimize human error, and ensure predictable outcomes that can be used for decision-making. Reducing manual effort frees time for analysis, because the most valuable security work is often interpreting what happened and why, rather than collecting raw signals. Minimizing human error matters because mistakes in execution can look like security failures, and security failures can be overlooked if the procedure is inconsistent. Predictable outcomes support trust, because stakeholders are more likely to act on results that they believe are repeatable and fair. This also supports scaling, because a well-designed automated check can be applied across many systems without expanding headcount in a linear way. In short, automation is a force multiplier when it is used to standardize what good testing looks like. BAS, conceptually, is about using simulated actions to measure detection and response readiness. Instead of waiting for a real adversary to test your defenses, you run controlled simulations that mimic certain behaviors, and then observe how your security controls and teams respond. The emphasis is not on breaking in for its own sake, but on validating whether alerts fire, whether they are routed properly, and whether responders can interpret and act on them. A BAS-style approach can cover technical control behavior, such as whether endpoint telemetry is collected, and operational behavior, such as whether the right people are notified within the expected window. In many programs, BAS fills the gap between theoretical control design and real operational performance. The outcome you care about is readiness that can be demonstrated and measured, not just assumed.
Repeatability is what makes BAS and automation valuable over time, because it allows you to compare results across changes.
If you run a simulation today and again after a tool upgrade, you want to be confident the difference in results reflects the upgrade, not a difference in how the test was performed. Repeatability also supports baselining, where you establish what normal detection performance looks like and then watch for drift.
Drift can be caused by configuration changes, logging changes, network redesign, or even simple things like new exclusions that were added without full review. When you can rerun the same checks, you can spot those shifts early and address them before they become major blind spots.
This is why repeatable measurement is a core competency, not an optional nice-to-have.
Safe scope controls matter because simulations and automated actions can cause disruption if they are not tightly bounded and authorized. Even tests that are non-destructive in intent can trigger automated defenses, consume resources, or create operational confusion if they are executed at the wrong time or against the wrong targets. Safe scope is about defining exactly what is allowed, which environments are in scope, what data is acceptable to touch, and what side effects are tolerated. Authorization is not a bureaucratic formality here. It is a safety control that prevents an exercise from turning into an incident. A mature posture also includes clear coordination with stakeholders, so responders know which activity is simulated and how to differentiate it from a real event. In exam terms, this is about demonstrating professional boundaries and responsible testing. Common use cases for automation and BAS revolve around testing alerts, validating controls, and measuring coverage in a way that can be repeated. Testing alerts means confirming not just that a rule exists, but that it actually fires under expected conditions and produces a signal that analysts can use. Validating controls means checking that prevention and detection mechanisms operate as designed, including endpoint visibility, network telemetry, and identity logging that supports investigation. Measuring coverage is about understanding what parts of the environment are visible and protected and where gaps exist, rather than assuming coverage is uniform. These use cases are practical because they connect directly to operational outcomes, such as reduced time to detect or improved triage quality. When you automate in these areas, you are building feedback loops that strengthen the security program continuously. Interpreting results is where automation becomes valuable or becomes noise, and the interpretation should always answer three questions: what triggered, what failed, and why. What triggered tells you which controls saw the behavior and produced usable signals, which helps confirm visibility and correct routing. What failed identifies where behavior occurred but no alert, log, or response action followed, which is often the most important outcome because it reveals blind spots. Why is the analysis step, and it is where you determine whether the failure is due to missing telemetry, misconfigured rules, poor thresholds, incorrect scoping, or operational process gaps. Without the why, results become a list of surprises with no path forward. With the why, results become actionable improvements that can be tested again for confirmation. A scenario makes this concrete. Imagine automated checks that simulate a set of benign behaviors intended to validate monitoring coverage across endpoints and network segments. The checks run on a schedule and generate expected signals that should appear in your monitoring systems, such as event records or alert notifications. Over time, the outputs show that certain segments consistently produce fewer signals, and further review reveals that logging was never enabled on those assets or that telemetry forwarding is misconfigured. The automation did not find a vulnerability in the classic exploit sense, but it exposed a security weakness that is just as dangerous, a monitoring blind spot where real adversary behavior could go unobserved. This is a common and high-impact outcome because attackers prefer places where they can operate quietly. The scenario demonstrates why measurement-focused automation is a legitimate security control validation method, not just administrative convenience. The reporting value of that scenario becomes stronger when you can show that the gap is consistent and reproducible, not a one-time anomaly. Automated checks produce consistent outputs, which makes it easier to build a clear narrative about what is missing, how you know it is missing, and what the consequences are. When your evidence is structured and repeatable, reviewers can trace how the conclusion was reached, and they can rerun the check after remediation to confirm the fix. That creates credibility because the finding is not dependent on a single screenshot or a single person's memory of what happened. Consistent outputs also help you quantify improvement because you can show before and after differences that reflect specific corrective actions.
In practice, this turns a vague concern about visibility into a measurable control story. Automation also improves documentation by making the process and the output predictable, which supports clearer reporting narratives. When results come in a standard format, analysts spend less time translating raw data and more time explaining implications and recommended actions. Standard outputs also enable easier comparison across teams, systems, and time periods, which reduces argument about whether two tests were truly the same. Documentation becomes less about describing how the test was run and more about what the test revealed, because the procedure is already encoded and consistent. This matters in environments where multiple people contribute to reporting, because consistency reduces misinterpretation. It also supports audit and governance needs, since automated records can demonstrate that controls were validated regularly and that findings were tracked to resolution. A major pitfall is automating without understanding, which often produces noise without insight. When people automate checks they do not fully comprehend, they may generate activity that triggers alerts for the wrong reasons, or fails to trigger alerts because the simulation does not match realistic conditions. That leads to confusion and wasted time, because responders cannot trust whether the signal represents a meaningful gap or a flawed test. Noise also creates fatigue, and fatigue is dangerous because it trains teams to ignore alerts, including the real ones.
Another pitfall is treating automation as a replacement for analysis, when in reality, automation should shift human effort from repetitive execution to thoughtful interpretation. The best automation amplifies expertise. It does not excuse the lack of it.
Quick wins are most effective when you start small, validate one control, and then expand gradually as confidence grows. A single, well-chosen automated check can prove value by revealing a gap, confirming a control, or establishing a baseline that stakeholders can understand. Once that check is stable and its outputs are trusted, you can add coverage incrementally rather than launching a broad set of simulations that no one can interpret. This incremental approach reduces risk because you are less likely to disrupt operations or flood monitoring systems with unfamiliar activity. It also improves quality because each new step is built on a proven foundation with clear expectations. Over time, the program becomes a collection of trusted measurements rather than an uncontrolled stream of automated activity. Governance is what keeps automation and BAS safe and sustainable, and it includes approvals, timing windows, and clear stop conditions. Approvals ensure that the right stakeholders understand what will run, where it will run, and what side effects are possible, which prevents accidental disruption and political fallout. Timing windows matter because tests should avoid peak operational periods, sensitive business cycles, and change windows where results would be hard to interpret. Stop conditions are essential because you need a clear rule for when a simulation must halt, such as unexpected resource impact, excessive alerting, or any interference with business operations. Governance also covers ownership, ensuring someone is accountable for maintaining the checks, reviewing results, and updating procedures as the environment changes. This is how automation remains a controlled measurement tool rather than an uncontrolled source of risk. A simple memory phrase ties the episode together: repeat, measure, learn, improve, govern. Repeat reminds you that consistency is the foundation, because without repeatability, you cannot compare outcomes or build confidence. Measure points to the purpose of automation and BAS, which is to generate evidence of detection and response readiness rather than relying on assumptions. Learn is the interpretive step where you translate outcomes into causes, connecting failures to missing telemetry, misconfigurations, or process gaps. Improve is where remediation happens, and where you rerun the same checks to confirm that changes produced the intended effect. Govern reminds you that safety, authorization, and control boundaries are what make the entire approach professional and sustainable.
As we conclude episode 84, the value of automation is that it turns security validation into a repeatable practice that supports consistency, measurement, and continuous improvement. When used well, it reduces manual effort, strengthens reporting, and creates clear feedback loops that help teams correct blind spots before adversaries exploit them. A safe automation goal you can say aloud is to routinely verify that a specific detection control triggers reliably under controlled simulated conditions, producing an expected signal that can be tracked over time.
That goal is narrow enough to manage and broad enough to create real value, because it ties automation to readiness rather than to activity for activity's sake.
When you can articulate a goal like that, you are thinking like a tester and an operator at the same time.
That blend of measurement and restraint is exactly what makes automation and BAS useful in real security programs.
Episode 85, Post-Exploitation Goals 1. Intro. Explain what to do after access. Prove impact responsibly. 2. Describe post-access goals, confirm reach, understand environment, and collect evidence.
3. Explain restraint, avoid unnecessary damage, and keep changes minimal.
4. Describe privilege assessment. Determine what your access allows and what it does not.
5. Explain impact demonstration. Show real risk with limited, controlled actions.
6. Describe data access boundaries. Collect only what supports the finding. 7. Explain decision points. When to move laterally versus when to stop.
8. Walk a scenario where access exists, but scope and safety restrict expansion.
9. Describe safe evidence collection. Screenshots, logs, and minimal proof artifacts. 10. Explain pitfalls. Over-collecting data, or installing unnecessary persistence mechanisms.
11. Describe quick wins, identify crown jewels, and verify access pathways carefully.
12. Explain how to translate post-access work into clear reporting language. 13. Mini-review with the memory anchor. Confirm, constrain, prove, document, stop. 14. Conclusion. Recap post-access goals, then plan one responsible proof step.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.